I like the Chargers edge rusher room, but if they're not sold on it yet, there is a former top 5 pick they could potentially trade for to bring an impact this year and be the heir apparent to Khalil Mack.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers now for 9 seasons together. This is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there, as always, for making us your first listen. To make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcasts from. David, what do we got today?
Daniel, we know Chargers GM Joe Ortiz will never be satisfied with what the roster looks like. So if he's not satisfied with the edge room, maybe they go out and make a trade for Kayvon Thibodeaux of the Giants. They got a lot of money tied up in that defensive line. Maybe he could become available. And also we're going to talk about Trey Harris and his ability to potentially break Ladd's records. I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult. And the Chargers have been blessed to have 2 elite tackles. And I think both of them could be in line to win the newest award created by the NFL.
And shout out to the NFL for having an award for the big guys and giving them some proper accolades and something to shoot for. They need an award. I'm glad that they get one now, especially since the Chargers have a couple of guys who could actually try and win it. But it is a Chargers mailbag day because we have a big interview tomorrow with the host of Locked On SEC to get into all the Chargers SEC draft picks and even a guy like Rocket Sanders. But today we're giving you guys the steering wheel, and one Chargers fan had a question about maybe an edge rusher they could target that we haven't talked about yet. Let's hear what Thad has for us.
What's up, it's Thad. My question to you guys was, if you thought potentially Thibodeaux on the Giants was a potential trade acquisition at some point in the season. Seems like he's pretty phased out of their defense, and it would be a pretty good addition, a depth piece, I think, if the price was right. Thanks.
This is a good question, and a guy that I really hadn't thought about. And I think the difference is with him, that changes things other than the guys that we've talked about before, or even some guys we've seen mentioned like a Von Miller, is this is a guy that would not only potentially bring an impact for you this year, because like a Von Miller move would be more of like, okay, let's win right now, we're an edge rusher away type of a move. This is someone that you would get a little bit of a chance to see how they fit with you and if you should re-sign them, because the Giants did pick up his 5th-year option even after drafting Abdul Carter and signing Brian Burns to a ridiculous deal. You would have that chance to have not just an impact player this year, but a potential heir apparent if you're not necessarily sold on Tuipulotu, or you want some insurance that Kyle Kennard can have some time to grow into a starting role or potentially even be a big-time player for you down the road. I don't hate this, David, and I think the thing about this is obviously the market dictates what's available, and I think this would have to be a move where the Giants are a dumpster fire, which they absolutely could be, and then around the trade deadline, they're saying, okay, well, let's get something for this guy. He's our 3rd edge rusher. We're going to have to pay him $14 million in 2026. Let's find a deal so that we can actually recoup some of the value.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not a surprise as to why the Chargers may be interested. He's 24 years old, and I feel like he's had some solid production, on his resume here. So, he's played 14 games, 17 games, and 12 games. His best season, obviously, was in the middle where he played 17 games, 50 tackles, 12 tackles for loss, and 11 and a half sacks to go along with 3 forced fumbles. That's big-time production right there. That's what you're looking for. That kind of almost mirrors Joey Bosa's best season with the Chargers. So that's something that they definitely would be interested in. I love the combination of youth there. I feel like, hey, this is something I would not be opposed to. As you said, it's something that could help them right now and get some juice in that edge room, and also something that they could really kind of cross off the list, at least as far as something that, they don't have to address later on, because now they have several young guys in the room that hopefully they feel very good about.
Well, and this is the thing. Think about this scenario. The Chargers go into this season the way they have the room right now, and you don't necessarily get a full-blown breakout from Tuipulotu. You don't have an idea because of potentially the sample size of what Kyle Kennard is going to be in 2026 and if he's going to be ready to be a full-time starter on the edge. And you have Khalil Mack retiring.
Yeah.
That puts you in a spot, right?
Yeah.
This is something that could potentially prevent that. And it's not a guy that you would have to trade for and immediately give that contract extension to. And the Giants, with a desperate head coach and a desperate GM who are probably fighting for their jobs, who knows if they would want to do this because it's kind of a win now thing, which is why they would have to kind of just be at the deadline for a team that's not going anywhere, but they're not going to be able to pay him. They traded for Brian Burns and signed him to a 5-year, $141 million contract.
Yeah, big money.
They also signed Dexter Lawrence to a 4-year, $87 million contract. Where's the money going to come from? I don't see them re-signing him. It could potentially push them, to think about moving him. And I think if the Chargers, for the right price, could think, hey, this is a guy that we could help get the full potential out of with our coaching staff, I don't think it's the craziest thing in the world, even if it's not a guy you see mentioned around them very often. Pretty solid against the run and the pass. You talked about that 11.5 sack season. And even last year, in only 12 games, he still was able to put up 40 pressures, which is as many as Tuipulotu did in a full season, obviously in a rotation. Not insane to think that the next duo for this team could be Kayvon Thibodeaux and Tuipulotu. What's wrong with that, right? With a guy like Kyle Kennard being that situational edge rusher, that pass rush specialist, which I believe he could do instantly almost, to be there and not have to pressure him in. And guess what? If Kyle Kennard is that guy, you're 2 years away from Tuli and also the guy you could be trading for in Thibodeaux being free agents anyways, and now you have another option, so you don't have to necessarily break the bank. So I think there's multiple layers to this where it would say, hey, maybe it's not something people are talking about, but not as crazy as you might think. Then again, if Kyle Kennard is that dude, maybe it's not an issue. And the dude has a Chargers mailbag question for us today saying, since we basically switched out Bosa for a draft pick and Kyle Kennard, with Bosa not playing much in the last couple of years, do you think it's a wash, or did our edge rusher room get better or worse? So, David, I think the question really here is, can what you lost in Joey Bosa be filled by what you added, I guess, in Kyle Kennard?
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes, definitely. I mean, you look at what Joey Bosa did in 2024, he played only 457 total snaps, and really that's, 14 games. He only played in, 40 or more snaps in 6 of those 14 games. So, he was definitely on a rotation. He was used very sparingly. He did provide the 5 sacks to go along with 2 forced fumbles, but I mean, I think you look at what Bud Dupree did last year, that's, he outperformed what Joey Bosa did. So I don't think it's outlandish to expect Kyle Kennard to be able to come in here and provide 4 or 5 sacks and, in the rotational role that he's going to be in. He's not going to be asked to be that same level of guy, that Joey Bosa is when he's on the edge. Obviously, when he's right, when Joey Bosa is healthy, he's a very well-rounded defensive end, a guy that can definitely set a physical edge, and a guy, obviously, that can get after the quarterback. We are not so sold as far as, Kyle Kennard's ability to stop the run, at least quite yet. But we do know that he has some real juice to get after the quarterback in those kind of situational pass rusher roles, which I think, he would be able to, and he should be penciled into that, especially when the Chargers like to get creative, put together those NASCAR packages to go really get after the quarterback.
Yeah, it's hard to do like an apples to apples comparison with it, just because obviously one important part of this is you're talking about the 2024 version of Joey Bosa, which, like you said, was a rotational guy, not a full-time player for you, but was still a very effective run stopper, which is somewhere that he has a huge edge over Kyle Kennard coming into the NFL. But I don't think it's that simple. I don't think you're necessarily expecting Kyle Kennard to come and replace Joey Bosa. I think what you're hoping for is that Tuipulotu can make the leap to be better than the version of Joey Bosa that you got last year, and that Kyle Kennard can slide into that Tuipulotu role and give you the pressure and give you that production that you were getting when Tuli was just more of a rotational guy and not the main starter.
Yeah.
That I don't think is very far-fetched at all, right? And if you can get that, it really mitigates losing someone even with the top-end talent that we know Joey Bosa had. So I'm pretty bullish on Kyle Kennard. We know he brings some juice. He has that first step burst and the ability to get around the edge, and that's something the Chargers don't really have or don't really specialize in them at the moment. But we won't really know if it's better until we see Tuli and his improvements, until we see Kyle Kennard at the NFL level. But we still have more great Chargers mailbag questions to get into, including maybe one better set for an overreaction buy or sell Tuesday. Could Trey Harris be actually better than Ladd McConkey was as a rookie. The problem is Ladd McConkey's still here. So we're going to talk about all that and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means it's time to hire, and you need a partner that works just as hard as you do, and that's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in, because when you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip: add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say that LinkedIn helped them find high quality hires. And we always talk about that, the quality of hires that you get with LinkedIn, so you don't have to try to replace that job again. But also the expediency that you can find somebody to be able to get people in front of you that fast so you can fill that role quickly is also super important. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Dave, let's continue this Chargers mailbag, which usually is a Fan Mail Friday, but we have a special guest, the host of the Locked On SEC podcast, coming on tomorrow to talk about the Chargers SEC draft picks. And we had some really good mailbag questions, but there was one buy or sell Tuesday that we wanted to get into because we had a good one here about Trey Harris. Again, we're going to talk a lot about tomorrow as well. From Laser Beaming, who said, buy or sell Ladd McConkey walked so that Trey Harris could run. Trey Harris will surpass Ladd's receiving yards and touchdowns next season. Wow. That's an overreaction, and I'm like, tier 1 of the Trey Harris fan club. I mean, he was the guy who was pounding the table before the draft even, right? And the guy we had in our mock draft. I think the problem is, David, mostly with this is just the situation. Like, he's going into such a different situation than what Ladd McConkey was going into, and a lot more talent to have to fight against, like you alluded to earlier.
Yeah, I mean, Ladd McConkey's when he got drafted, he stepped in and he looked around and said, "Okay, well, I could probably do some things here with the people that are in the room, right?" And now, after that playoff loss, and obviously the very real need to add a lot more bodies, a lot more weapons to that room, you look around now and you say, oh, wow, I only got one football. How am I going to be able to get it to all of these different guys, Trey Harris included, especially when you got a guy like Mike Williams that you brought back into the fold that has that chemistry with Justin Herbert, who's going to play that X receiver role that Trey Harris is also probably prototypically designed to play as well. And he'll definitely get his snaps, and I'm sure that he'll factor into it. But opportunity is going to be the biggest difference between these two people, and why I feel like there is really no chance that Trey Harris is going to be able to reach what Ladd McConkey was able to accomplish, because the opportunities are not going to be afforded to him to do so.
The biggest thing is this. If Trey Harris is putting up 1,150 receiving yards, which is what Ladd McConkey did last year, 1,149, if he's beating that, what does Ladd's stat line look like, right? Because I don't know if the Chargers are going to have two 1,100-yard receivers in 2025, and I also don't think Ladd McConkey is going to get worse, especially considering you go back and look at those box scores early on in the season, and you just see how little involved he was. Like, he didn't even get going until like week 7 or 8 last year, and then just went absolutely bonkers down the stretch. But I think it's just really hard to compare those two situations. Like, Ladd McConkey stepped onto the field last year and was the Chargers' best wide receiver, and it wasn't particularly close.
Yeah.
That's just a fact of it, right? And I also just think that with someone like Trey Harris, who has actual, players who have started in this league and guys who have chemistry with Justin Herbert, like you talked about, if he took over the starting X role, if he became a starter at some point this season, that wouldn't surprise me. But to put up anything close to what Ladd McConkey did last year, which was beat Keenan Allen's historic rookie season, he would have to have that job instantly, and he would potentially have to outperform Ladd McConkey, and I just don't see that happening. I do think that Ladd McConkey will be better in year 2, and I think that getting someone like a Trey Harris makes things even easier for someone like Ladd McConkey and the amount of weapons that they have now to just say, hey, we can't just focus all of our attention defensively on this one dude, because teams tried that last year and it was still hard to slow him down, even when they were doing it. But let's get to this next question we have here from Tino, who says, which of the day 3 rookies do you have the highest expectations for in 2025? And I think this is spawned by the success of guys like Cam Hart and Tarheeb Still. In the Tom Telesco era, we almost never had guys we could talk about on day 3 that were going to be big impact players for the Chargers in year 1. Yet, when you have the draft that the Chargers had last year, you're kind of programmed to say, okay, well, they're going to do it again. Which guys are they going to be? So, David, when you see this question, I know who I had in mind, who popped up in my head first. Who was it for you?
I know it. I know it's the same person, and I know you're going to be very mad about that. But I mean, to me, it's blatantly
Keandre
obvious.
Lambert-Smith.
Of course not. You know I'm talking about Arondé Gadsden II, and I'm sure that's what you're talking about too. But
sure,
Arondé Gadsden II, to me, I love the strong hands. I love the physicality through contact. His ability to really attack the seam and to be a really true weapon. A guy that they obviously were very, very high on. They traded up to be able to secure his services. So the Chargers and Justin Herbert hasn't had a accomplished pass catching tight end in several years, since probably Hunter Henry, right? So to be able to have a guy like this who has the type of kind of explosive element to his pass catching skill set, I think is going to do wonders for this Chargers offense. And it's going to help everybody else because he's going to be able to attack the middle of the football field. I can't wait to see what he looks like catching passes from Justin Herbert.
I love Arondé Gadsden II. I think the biggest question for me is just where he is in that room and how quickly he can climb up the depth chart. Because unlike edge rusher with Kyle Kennard, it would be very, very hard for me to believe would not have a role. Your third tight end might not have a role in most games, right? Whereas, the defense is much more of a rotation. You're not going to rotate your tight ends, at least to, your third tight end very often. But he's absolutely the guy that popped up in my head first. I mean, just because of the fact that he brings an element to the tight end room that they just don't currently have. And he is, I think, the most receiving inclined tight end and just kind of, instinctual receiver that Justin Herbert has had at that position. I mean, he's a guy that has obviously great hands, like you talked about. His feel and spatial awareness, sideline, coming back, being helpful to the quarterback, all of those things for a tight end, he is really, really advanced. The thing that's going to hurt him is his blocking ability and how quickly can they kind of get around that, or how much are they willing to put him on the field and overexpose him if he can't block at the next level. And that's always going to be the thing with Arondé Gadsden until he shows he could do it. And part of the reason he dropped to the 5th round to begin with, because obviously if it was just the receiving parts of his game, he'd be a 2nd or 3rd round pick. I mean, just based on that. So the Chargers do have a general manager who was with the Ravens when they brought in Isaiah Likely, who has a very similar body type to what they got in Arondé Gadsden. And also, I think we saw that Greg Roman started to kind of figure out how to use Stone Smart more down the stretch. They never fully trusted him, but he was a guy who even switched later in his career than Arondé Gadsden to being an actual tight end. Whereas, Stone Smart went from quarterback to wide receiver to tight end. He's a guy that's always been, in a similar spot. And I thought really kind of impressed me for someone I thought couldn't block at all to being able to do enough. And maybe doing enough will get him on the field. But hard to say that Kyle Kennard wouldn't kind of throw his name into the ring of this conversation either, David, just because it's hard to imagine that he won't have a significant role as someone that it would be pretty shocking to see him not getting snaps on a game-to-game basis.
Yeah, he's the other guy that obviously came to mind for me as well, just because of the bend. Like I just don't know if there's anybody else in that room that can really bend around the corner and get around an offensive tackle the way that he demonstrated he was able to do in college football last year. That's a very, very rare skill. Some pass rushers, they win with hand usage. Some pass rushers win with pure power, like a Khalil Mack. And some people just have that innate ability to be slippery around the edge. And I think Kyle Kennard possesses that ability. So I really like the complement of skill sets that the Chargers have in that edge room. We'll see if it all comes together and produces some magic this year.
And I think the thing with Kyle Kennard is kind of like Arondé Gadsden, where it's like he has kind of one big red flag, and it's the blocking ability. And if that part of his game will translate, and for Kyle Kennard, it's the run stopping ability. And he has kind of the chase down part of his game where he's athletic enough to chase down running backs from behind when he's on the weak side and things of that nature. But it's more about getting on the edge, setting a physical edge, being able to contain the edge, which are all just things that in the NFL are non-negotiables, because if you can't do it, they will find you, they will target you, they will make you pay for it. So I'm not worried about him in obvious, 3rd and 13 situations. He'll be able to do fine there. But the other part of it is,
Yeah.
it's not just the bend. There's lots of guys who have bend. When the NFL level players know that's your go-to move, that's when you have to find other things. And you have to be able to, master the inside move. You have to be able to add to your arsenal so that you're not a one-trick pony, because one-trick ponies aren't always super effective. You got to be able to expand your game a little bit. But we still have more to get into, including the NFL's newest award, the Protector of the Year, the big men finally getting some shine, and the Chargers have 2 candidates who could be vying for it as soon as next season with Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater. Which one is more likely to do it? We're going to talk about that and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. Thank you to the everydayers, as always, for checking us out today and really just making your voice heard, getting your guys' questions in on Twitter at LockedOnLAC, getting your voicemails in at 323-524-7924, where you guys have really showed up since I called out for it. So I appreciate you guys, because that is always the easiest way to get on the fan shows, is putting your voice on it, right? Putting your name on it and doing it the old-fashioned way. But thank you, as always, for making us your first listen. If you need a second listen, make sure to check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show, where Joe Marino and Kyle Krabs have a very unique show that can make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason, covering everything around the league on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast from. But David, let's start here with something that's brand new. A question we got on YouTube from Jaspy D, who says, who's going to have a better shot at the new Protector of the Year award? Rashawn Slater or Joe Alt? Bolt up, FTR from the UK. Whether it's here, whether it's across the pond, it's always FTR for sure. David, this is something
That's right.
we just found out about actually on Wednesday, when the NFL announced, as part of, not banning the tush push and things like that, that they have a new award, which is the Protector of the Year award. Obviously, very basic name there. Not much to really kind of get into as far as, the deepness of the name or naming it after a player. The Chargers have 2 guys, David, but which one of these guys do you think is more likely to be able to win the award for the best offensive lineman in the NFL?
Hey, Joe Alt was incredibly impressive last year, stepping in as a rookie and probably turning himself into a top 15 right tackle. He was very, very good. But Rashawn Slater was on a different planet last year. He was absolutely fantastic. A 91.1 overall grade, 90 pass block, 82 run block. So no matter what you asked him to do, he did it at an elite level. Only 22 pressures and 3 sacks allowed in 547 pass blocking snaps. And 2 of the 3 sacks that he allowed came in the same game against Myles Garrett, where it looked like Rashawn was not quite right. He was dealing with maybe some type of injury in that game there.
It was still pretty soon after he had missed time, right? And then the bye week and the week before that against the Steelers.
Yeah, so besides that, it's 1 sack in 14 games. So I think for me, Rashawn Slater is definitely the guy I think would probably win the award first. However, it would not shock me at all to see Joe Alt continue to develop and turn into a monster of an offensive lineman and etch his name on that award as well.
I mean, technically also, this isn't just an offensive tackle award, right? But we're not saying that Zion Johnson can't win this award next year. No, I mean, I think it's going to lean towards the tackles because it's thought of as the most important position on the offensive line.
Yeah.
It's the most highly paid position on the offensive line. And whether or not you believe it, and I think the stigma behind, which one's more important, left tackle or right tackle, has, died down a little bit. Left tackle feels like the one, that makes the money, that, gets the awards if there are awards to be got. And I think that's why Rashawn Slater has to be the answer here, especially also because he's been an All-Pro before. This is not something, it's hard for me to imagine that the player who wins the offensive lineman of the year is not also going to be the first team All-Pro, whatever position that they're playing,
agree.
right? And I think that the hard thing for this is going to be first, it's going to be some sort of a popularity contest to a certain degree. It might be the best lineman on the best team or one of the best teams, and it's going to be hard to beat guys like a Jordan Mailata or a Penei Sewell, who is a top 5 overall pick, right?
A Lane Johnson, right? Yeah.
Lane Johnson. I mean, Lane Johnson's getting up there in years. Trent Williams is also, the guy, the alpha male, the silverback gorilla himself. He's getting up there. This is who that award would go to, because it's not only was he the best lineman, but he's maybe the best player in the league at one point.
Yeah.
The door could be opening, and there could be a chance for someone like a Rashawn Slater or Joe Alt to step in there. I think the interesting thing here specifically about Joe Alt is if you're talking about physical ability, I mean, even hearing Rashawn Slater talk about Joe Alt, he's like, man, like what I wouldn't give to have those arms or to be 6'8" or to have that kind of physical ability that Joe Alt has. There's no higher ceiling on an offensive tackle in the NFL that's higher than what Joe Alt is if he realizes that full potential. So
I agree.
To think he couldn't be the best offensive lineman in the entire NFL if he keeps on this projection would be selling him short. But let's also be honest, Rashawn Slater was better than Joe Alt was as a rookie. So to think that guy who's been an all-pro second team before doesn't have a shot at it, I think would be selling him short as well. So two guys that could realistically have it, but the Chargers, I think, have to be good for that to happen. But we do have a voicemail here about another offensive lineman, maybe one that could take an unexpected leap going into the 2025 season. Let's hear what Ryan has for us.
Hey, Dan and David and Dan, this is Ryan from We Are the Storm. I just had a comment regarding Zion Johnson. Is it possible that he has a resurgent year and has a very strong performance? I'm thinking that it was his first year with Roman, the other guys, and he was just learning, like as a rookie. So is it possible that he just comes out and he's dominant this year? Thanks, guys. Love your show.
Thanks for calling in, Ryan. I think the hard thing for this question specifically is how many times we've bought him before, right? Like he's been the guy that's been on the tip of our tongue where it's like, hey, who's a dude who could actually do it this year? But I do think it's a good point he brings up just about the differences in offenses, because we talk about it with Justin Herbert. You don't talk about it with your starting left guard. And I think the importance there is he has had a different offensive coordinator every year he's been in the league, right? 2022, they had Joe Lombardi as their offensive coordinator. He got fired the year after that. Then it was Kellen Moore who came in. And then his last season, he had Greg Roman as his offensive coordinator. So maybe there is something to that. He also switched sides at one point, going back to the left side was supposed to be his more natural position. I just think it's so hard, David, because we've been on that train before, and it ended up falling short, and it's getting kind of harder to keep buying back into it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm definitely at the I'll believe it when I see it stage with Zion Johnson, and also I think it's not really any favors being done to him to try to switch him to center as well. So you're going from right guard to left guard to center, and if you're expecting him to have a resurgent or a breakout year playing another new position, I just think that is way too much copium to try to deal with when you're talking about that. So is it possible? Sure, it's possible. I just don't know if I expect it.
And I think it leads nicely to the last question we have here for this Chargers mailbag is from Bitcoin Not Crypto on Twitter. He says, should the Chargers try to re-sign Zion Johnson next offseason? Mainly because you may not have better options next offseason. Would it be a mistake to give up on him? He has elite physical gifts. I think this is partially like the sunken cost fallacy, right? Where it's like, but what if he goes on to be someone better somewhere else? Like, you can't really think about that. Like, you have to know he can play better. And I think for me, he would just have to play so much better than we've seen from him that it's hard for me to imagine there's any case where the Chargers are re-signing him next year unless he is absolutely excellent in 2025.
Yeah, hey, he's been out there 1,000+ snaps in all 3 seasons, and, that's fantastic. But it's also 14 sacks and 106 pressures allowed in those 3 seasons to go along with 16 penalties. And Zion Johnson looks like a monster. I mean, you look at him, you're like, yeah, that's what I want my offensive lineman to look like. Gigantic, big, broad shoulders, very, very strong, very intelligent. But it's the inconsistencies in his game that makes the physical gifts kind of null and void. I mean, if you're not able to go out there and play the same way and be consistent, it doesn't matter how physically gifted you are. We saw that with Joey Bosa. Joey Bosa was extremely physically gifted, but he could never stay on the football field. So that physical potential was never realized. And so with Zion Johnson, you have to see it. And I don't know if you've seen anything right now, which obviously the Chargers co-signed when they didn't pick up his 5th-year option, that would warrant the Chargers re-signing him and bringing him back.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we'll continue to say, hey, the number that they would have had to bring him back, even if he had played well in his first 3 seasons, it would have been hard to bring him back at, $17-18 million for a center. That's at the very top of the market. He'd have to be playing like he was one of, if not the best centers in the league for them to pick it up. Like Tyler Linderbaum has played for the Ravens, and he's been pretty good, but they didn't pick up his 5th-year option either, just because it counts as an offensive line number. It doesn't differentiate between centers and tackles. So the number is just gigantic, especially playing as many snaps as Zion Johnson has, which kicks up the escalator to make it an even bigger number. So the thing about this is, it's not about the elite physical gifts. He's always had that 9.75 relative athletic score coming out compared to all the guards coming out in the draft. And that is with being a shorter guy. Very long arms, strong as a bull, was thought to be one of the smartest offensive linemen coming out of the draft in the year he did. The problem is it's just the inconsistent awareness, which is just why it's so hard to truly buy into him being the center of the future, but also trying to buy into him potentially getting re-signed or having a huge bounce back season in 2025. He's one of those guys that when he loses quickly. And that's why it's so hard to watch him at times, because he'll play 90% of a good game, but the 10% that's bad makes it impossible to keep betting on him again. I mean, the Chargers are doing it. I mean, listen to Jim Harbaugh talk about this dude. The way they talk about him, you'd think it was a foregone conclusion that he'd be re-signed, right? The smartest player on the team, one of the most athletic players on the team, one of the most technical players on the team. They love him, right? But the problem is the numbers don't lie. And if you weren't blaming it on him for those at least faults last season, you'd be blaming it on the guy standing next to him, Bradley Bozeman. And obviously they don't have a problem with him because they brought him back on a 2-year deal. So I think it's, dare I say, almost impossible to see the Chargers re-signing Zion Johnson after the 2025 season. But if they did, it would mean something great has happened. And with how good he plays when he's good, it does always feel like he's on the verge of a breakout. It does feel like he can turn it around and change our opinion on him. But like you said, I'll see it when I believe it. And I'm not ready to jump on that bandwagon again. I'm not willing to jump on that hype train that for 3 years in a row is kind of taking me off a cliff. So I'll have to see it. I hope it can happen because it would mean the Chargers, you'd feel good about 4 of the 5 slots on their offensive line, which is kind of unheard of in the last decade. So that is going to wrap things up for today's show. Make sure you guys are back here tomorrow, subscribing on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcast from, because we have a very special guest, the host of the Locked On SEC show, to talk about Trey Harris, talk about Kyle Kennard, maybe even talk a little bit about Lad McConkey, the rookie phenom. So make sure you guys are back here tomorrow by following us wherever you get your shows from, and also on all of our social media too, because we post the show to those places every day, at Locked On LAC on Twitter, at Locked On Chargers on Instagram, and on our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. If you guys want to be the next person on a mailbag or buy or sell show, hit us up at all of those places, or on all of those places, and also call into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924 to get your 30-second Chargers voicemail on there. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. Make sure you're back for our special guest show to end the week tomorrow. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.